Every year, millions laugh at a Christmas movie about an 8-year-old left alone, but almost no one talks about how Home Alone normalizes emotional abuse, glaring adult indifference, and child neglect as holiday fun. In reality, Kevin is humiliated by his family, exiled over a spilled drink, and then left behind entirely unsupervised for 3 days, while the adults around him fail at every possible checkpoint. If we stop laughing for a moment, the story is not harmless nostalgia. It is a case study in how failure at home and in the community becomes invisible so long as it is dressed up as comedy. If you want more deep dives into the disturbing truths behind the stories we grew up with, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Because once you see what actually happens on and off the screen, you may never watch Home Alone the same way again. Dinner at the McCallister house isn't just loud, it's a masterclass in humiliation. The table is overflowing with relatives, voices colliding, everyone jostling for space and attention. In the middle of this chaos sits Kevin, an 8-year-old, barely heard above the noise. When he asks for his favorite cheese pizza, Buzz, his older brother, makes a show of gobbling the last slice, then taunts him with fake retching noises. Laughter erupts from the cousins, and the adults do nothing to stop it. Kevin's frustration boils over, and in the scuffle that follows, milk spills across the table. In a flash, the mood turns. Uncle Frank, never missing a chance, leans in and calls Kevin a little jerk, loud enough for everyone to hear. His father's response isn't comfort, it's disappointment. He sighs, blames Kevin for ruining dinner, and quietly gathers up the ruined airline tickets soaked with milk. No one asks what really happened. No one steps in to defend Kevin. Instead, the entire family piles on, treating him like the problem that needs to be removed. The message is clear. In this house, Kevin is the scapegoat, the one who gets blamed when things go wrong, whether or not it's his fault. Experts in child psychology call this emotional abuse. When a child's feelings are dismissed, when insults are normalized, and when punishment comes not for what you did, but for who you are in the family's pecking order. The film wraps this in jokes and slapstick, but if we stop laughing for a moment, what we are watching is a child being isolated and ridiculed by the very people meant to protect him. The dinner table isn't just a scene, it's the opening act in a story where Kevin's pain is the punchline. Kevin gets sent to the attic, a place he has already said scares him. There is no comforting word from his parents, no explanation, just a sharp command to go upstairs and stay there. The attic is not cozy. It is cold, cluttered, and isolated, far from the warmth and noise of the rest of the house. For an 8-year-old, being locked away like this is not just a timeout. It is a message that he does not belong, that his feelings do not matter, and that the family's problems are his fault to bear alone. This is more than a punishment for spilled milk. It is a textbook example of scapegoating when a child becomes the target for a family's stress and frustration regardless of what actually happened. Child psychologists call this kind of isolation emotionally damaging, especially when it is paired with ridicule and blame. The attic becomes a symbol of Kevin's place in the family, out of sight, out of mind, left to deal with his fear and anger alone. Lying in bed, Kevin does not get angry, he gets desperate. He says out loud that he wishes his family would disappear. The film plays this for a laugh, as if it is just a childish outburst, but the words land heavy. For a child to wish away his own family is not comedy, it is a sign of deep loneliness and hurt. When a kid says, "I wish you'd all just go away," it usually means they feel invisible, unwanted, or overwhelmed by pain that no one else seems to notice. The attic scene is often remembered as a setup for the movie's magic, but if we stop laughing for a moment, it is something much darker. A child shut away and ignored, making a wish that no child should ever have to make. That wish and the silence that follows hang in the air, setting the stage for what happens when the adults really do disappear. The morning after Kevin's wish, the McCallister house erupts in a different kind of chaos. Alarms fail, everyone oversleeps, and 15 people scramble to make an international flight. In the driveway, a neighbor's kid wanders over, bundled in a parka, and peppers the adults with questions. Amid the confusion, the head count is done by a teenager, not a parent, and the neighbor is mistakenly counted as Kevin. No one actually looks at his face. It is a comedy of errors, except in real life, this is where duty would come into play. At O'Hare, the group barrels through security. Boarding passes are scanned, but gate agents in 1990 rely on the manifest and on the family's assurance that all are present. There is no airline policy forcing staff to check each child against a parent for a group this size. The system trusts the adults to keep track of their own. By the time the plane is in the air, Kevin's absence is a secret only the house knows. That trust becomes a blind spot. On the flight to Paris, Kate McCallister suddenly sits bolt upright and screams, "Kevin." The famous scream is played for laughs, and what follows is pure cinematic shorthand. In reality, a missing 8-year-old on an international trip would trigger an immediate scramble. Cabin crew would alert the captain, and the captain would radio for ground support. Airline operations would coordinate with police back in Chicago. The film skips all of this, cutting straight to the parents' panic and a resigned overnight layover. The audience gets a punchline, and the real world would get a crisis response. If we stop laughing for a moment, what is missing is not just a child, but the entire safety net designed to protect him. In the real world, an 8-year-old left alone for days in suburban Illinois would trigger a cascade of legal and institutional alarms. Airlines in 1990 already had strict unaccompanied minor policies. Children younger than 12 traveling alone were required to be checked in by an adult, escorted to the gate, and met at their destination by a named guardian. If a child was discovered missing after takeoff, the flight crew would alert the captain, who would contact airline operations. Ground staff would coordinate with local police and, if necessary, child protective services back home. There was no scenario where a missing child would be handled with a shrug and a standby ticket. Illinois law at the time was clear. Leaving a child younger than 14 unsupervised for an unreasonable period, with no regard for their mental or physical health, was considered neglect. The statute did not set a fixed number of hours. Instead, it focused on what any reasonable adult would consider safe. Kevin, an 8-year-old left alone for nearly 3 days, fits every legal definition of neglect, accidental or not. In similar cases from the late 1980s and the early 1990s, parents faced investigations and sometimes criminal charges for leaving children unattended overnight. In Home Alone, none of these systems engage. The parents are told to wait for a flight, the police response is minimal, and the airline takes no documented action. But under actual protocols, the McCallister's mistake would have triggered a coordinated response across airline, police, and child welfare agencies within hours, not days. The movie's world is not just careless. It erases the very safety nets designed to protect children like Kevin. Kevin McCallister spends nearly 3 full days and 2 nights completely alone in his family house. The timeline is clear. He wakes to an empty home after his attic punishment, spends the first day exploring his freedom, and by the 3rd night he is still fending for himself with no adult ever checking in. 3 days crosses every legal and ethical line. This is neglect, not a plot quirk. Under Illinois law, even a few hours of unsupervised time for a child his age could trigger a neglect investigation. In the early 1990s, real families faced criminal charges for far less. In December 1993, David and Sharon Skoo were arrested at O'Hare after leaving their daughters, ages 4 and 9, alone for 9 days while they vacationed in Mexico. The case made national headlines. Neighbors called police, Child Protective Services intervened, and the parents lost custody for months. Kevin's situation is shorter in duration, but not in principle. He is 8 years old, without supervision, with limited food support, and without a reliable way to reach help. In every real-world precedent, this would be called neglect, not an accident. If we stop laughing for a moment, what we are watching is a textbook case of abandonment that in real life leads to police, social workers, and headlines, not a family reunion. Kevin wakes up to a house that is silent and sunlit, a world with no parents, no siblings, no rules. At first, he races through the rooms, shouting with giddy relief, raiding the pantry, leaping on beds, watching movies he has never been allowed to see. For a few hours, it looks like every child's fantasy of freedom. But as the novelty fades, something else creeps in. The kitchen is a mess, and there is no one to clean it but him. The laundry piles up. Dinner means microwaving frozen macaroni alone at the counter. When the milk runs out, he has to brave the grocery store, clutching a coupon and rehearsing what to say to the cashier. Shoppers stare, but no one asks why an 8-year-old is buying detergent by himself. Back home, he talks to himself for comfort, repeating lines out loud as if a parent might answer. The bravado line becomes a shield, not afraid, spoken to steady his voice. That performance masks fear, but it does not erase it. Child psychologists call this parentification, a child forced to take on adult roles not out of choice, but out of survival. Underneath the resourcefulness is a kind of hypervigilance, watching, listening, bracing for threats that should not exist in a safe home. The more Kevin acts like a grown-up, the more invisible his fear becomes. If we stop laughing for a moment, what we are seeing is a child learning, far too early, that he cannot count on anyone but himself. Paint cans swinging from a staircase might look like cartoon mayhem, but trauma surgeons see something else. 2 kilograms of metal slamming into a human face with enough force to shatter the bones around the eyes, crush the nose, and knock out teeth. Emergency room doctors compare it to the aftermath of a car crash, orbital fractures, severe concussions, and the real possibility of a brain bleed that could be fatal without immediate surgery. Then there is the blowtorch. 7 seconds of direct flame on the scalp as Harry endures would cause third-degree burns deep into the skin and even the bone, requiring skin grafts and months of rehabilitation. In real life, the pain alone would send someone into shock, and untreated burns like that can turn deadly from infection. Marv's barefoot run across nails and broken glass is not slapstick either. A 3-inch nail through the foot can sever tendons, invite bone infections, and leave permanent nerve damage. Glass shards cut deep, risking weeks of antibiotics and the chance of never walking the same way again. Add in the repeated falls on ice, classic mechanisms for broken wrists, spinal fractures, and chronic back pain. Medical experts who have reviewed these scenes agree most of these injuries would send a person straight to the ICU, not back up the stairs for another round. If we stop laughing for a moment, the house is not a playground. It is a gauntlet of trauma that in reality would leave the wet bandits dead or disabled for life. For decades, audiences have howled at the sight of Harry and Marv slipping, crashing, and taking paint cans to the face. The violence is so over the top, so exaggerated, that it barely registers as real. Cartoon sound effects, quick recoveries, and the bumbling nature of the burglars all signal that this is safe to laugh at. But if we stop laughing for a moment, the reality is hard to ignore. Trauma surgeons have pointed out that a full paint can swung from the top of a staircase could shatter facial bones and cause a brain bleed. A blowtorch to the scalp would send someone to the hospital with third-degree burns and permanent disfigurement. Barefoot on nails and broken glass would cause deep puncture wounds and a high risk of infection. Ice-covered steps could lead to broken bones and spinal injury. Yet the film's world runs on cartoon physics. No matter how many times Harry and Marv are smashed, burned, or impaled, they pop back up, dazed but alive. The audience is gently nudged to root for Kevin, to see the burglars as clowns who deserve every injury. The comedy works because the pain is not allowed to feel real. But what does it say about us that we find an 8-year-old forced into life or death combat not just thrilling, but hilarious? When violence is dressed up as slapstick and the villains are coded as buffoons, it is easy to forget that in another context, these scenes would be horrifying. If we stop laughing for a moment, the punchline starts to look like complicity. When the McCallisters finally call the police from Paris, the response is almost theatrical in its indifference. An officer drives to the house, gives a single knock, peers through a window, and leaves. There is no attempt to make real contact, no effort to confirm whether a child is actually safe inside. In 1990, Illinois law defined leaving a child under 14 alone for an unreasonable period as neglect, enough to trigger a mandatory investigation. The film, however, shrugs this off. It shows a welfare check that would have failed every best practice at the time. Not a single neighbor steps in, despite lights on, and deliveries piling up. In actual cases from the era, neighbors often called police at the first sign of a child alone. Here, the silence is total. If we stop laughing for a moment, the real story is not just about bad parents. It is about a community and a system that look the other way. Old Man Marley arrives as a figure of whispered rumors and sideways glances, a working-class neighbor dismissed by the McCallisters and feared by the children. When Kevin is cornered in his own home after surviving what no child should ever face alone, Marley steps in. He does not hesitate. He sees a child in danger and he acts, using his shovel not as a weapon but as a lifeline. The rescue happens only after Kevin has endured hours of terror and violence, after every adult system has failed him. Marley's quiet intervention stands in stark contrast to the indifference of the affluent world around him. In the end, the only real protection Kevin receives comes from the man his family ignored, the neighbor they never bothered to know. If we stop laughing for a moment, what is left is a story where help arrives too late, and only from the person least expected to provide it. When the McCallisters return, the house fills with hugs and laughter as if nothing ever happened. There is no apology, no conversation about the fear or the danger Kevin faced alone. The family simply moves on, and the audience is invited to do the same. The message is that a warm embrace erases days of abandonment and violence, no questions asked. This is not just a quirk of the original film. Alone 2 doubles down. Kevin is lost in New York, again left to fend for himself, again facing grown men intent on harm, this time with even more brutal traps and higher stakes. The pattern repeats, and the lesson is clear. Catastrophic adult failure can be reset with a smile, and children's pain becomes a running gag. If we stop laughing for a moment, it is hard to ignore how the franchise turns neglect and violence into holiday tradition. Today, over 400,000 children in the U.S. experience substantiated neglect each year. Most cases are far less cinematic, and all are just as real. When we laugh off stories of abandonment and violence, we risk teaching indifference where empathy should live. Entertainment shapes our instincts long after the credits roll. The next time a child's safety is played for laughs, ask yourself, whose reality are we normalizing? Share your perspective below.